Warning: the following video contains explicit language which may be offensive to some viewers or inappropriate for children. The content within this video is intended for mature audiences only.
Science fiction, the great teacher, the great inspiration. It helps us see the endless possibilities of life. So let's be inspired together.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over that way, what's beyond our own shores.
Sending out interceptors. We have taken them completely by surprise.
Hello everybody, it's Commodore Jeff. Oh, what a day here. Rain, and more rain. That's all we get around here these days now. And 4th of July is just around the corner, so I can just imagine what that's going to be like. Anyway, I was working on this thing here. I got Batman on his bat pod, you know. And the thing I like to do with things like this is I like to customize them to my liking, okay? And you'll notice the things that I did is I removed the big long Ford cannons that he had on that bike. I thought that was ridiculous, okay? You can't have things sticking out like that in front of a bike, and that won't not get damaged, you know what I'm saying? It's just, it doesn't look right, okay? It's bad enough that he's got machine guns, but I can tolerate the machine guns on the front here, you know, on the bottom, okay? But here he had those big friggin' barrels on there that shoot, you know, I don't know what the hell is it, 50 cal or some goddamn thing. It's too much firepower for the front of this thing, okay? And so I removed them and I left them open, like, you know, if you wanted to put like some kind of a special, say a missile or something like that in the front that can be launched, you know, that, you know, maybe that you can launch that. Certainly wouldn't have the same kind of recoil problem that you would have if you put something that those big guns on it. Okay. Then I worked on the handlebars here, so I still got to work on it some more. It doesn't quite look like it's supposed to, so I'm still working on that. And anyway, I got this and this figure from China a while back, and this bat pod here was well, including the shipping, it was over $200, okay? That's, you know, because the shipping was expensive. This is kind of heavy, you know, this weighs a couple of pounds, you know, especially when you put the figure on, it weighs even more. The figure was about, I think it was $290 or something. It's real rubber body armor here, and it came with different hands and different heads and shit like that, you know, and it's got, you know, the typical Batman accoutrements, you know, the bat cable and stuff like that he uses. I'm going to be putting a cable on this thing here to kind of give it some added features. There are lights on it that come on when you switch. Which let's see, where's the light? Right? Oh yeah, along the side here. See the light bulb here, and there's one on the other side. So there's a switch. I took the batteries out because I don't trust batteries. They burst and they ruin things. So I had them in there and I turned it on and it looked good. So I just took them out, and it's a bitch putting them back in there, because what you got to do is you have to take off this housing here, has to lift off, and then you got to unscrew the inside to put the friggin' batteries in there, and it's not easy, okay? So yeah, in order to save it from getting ruined, I just left the batteries out, but it does work and it's pretty good, you know. So, my video for today here is about James Bond, and I'm doing a review of Daniel Craig's last James Bond film, No Time to Die. Okay, and I know it's been a while, but I'm a person that likes to bide his time and just wait before watching something. I'm in no particular rush. So I finally bought it a few days ago, and I watched it last night, and so I wanted to give my feedback on it. Now, of all the Daniel Craig James Bond films, this one was the most boring of the others. Okay, and you know, I'm not going to say it was like completely boring, but when you put that one up against all the other 4 films that he did, there was a lot of action and stuff like that. But when you come into this one, it sort of seems like it's very slow paced. It's very pandering, you know, a little bit, you know, it just goes on. And I found myself kind of drifting off a little bit, you know, about 40 minutes into the movie, because it was so slow, you know, and it didn't seem like it was going anywhere. It's like the first 15 minutes of it, you know, was good, and then after that, and they fast forward it in time to 5 more years, and then it's like, you know, things are happening, Bond isn't around, everybody, you know, he's sort of on a self-imposed sabbatical, okay, and you know, you got another a woman who's using 007 because they need someone in that slot, right? I mean, they got the 00s, the agents, and since Bond wasn't around, they found another agent to take that spot, so now she's 007. And she's doing all kinds of stuff for M. And apparently things are getting out of control, and you know, things, you know, are building and stuff like that on, you know, as danger goes. And they need and Bond finds himself coming back because he meets up with he meets up with Felix. Felix needs his help for some mission, okay, and Bond says, okay, fine, you know. And during the course of helping him, one of the other people that worked for Felix was a turncoat working for the villain, and Felix gets killed. Bond flees and just in time before he's killed, and so he runs back to MI6, you know, to report what happened, and he wants to get back into the game so he can figure out what in the hell's going on. Okay, so all of that, it sounds like a lot happened, but it happened in a very slow and kind of lengthy process. So it was kind of, you know, not like, you know, fast paced, kicking ass and everything, you know, like the previous ones. Now this one was different, and so you had the added little drama of Bond and the girl that he kind of ties with at the end of the previous Bond film. Now they're together, sort of, and you know, sort of have a relationship and everything. And he finds out some stuff about her that she never told him, and you know, that kind of puts a split in their relationship, and they kind of part ways. And you know, you have that kind of melodrama going on at the same time everything else is happening. And after 5 years, and he comes back into MI6, he's confronted with her again. Okay, because she's part of what they're trying to an asset to use to try to figure out what's going on. So you got the nervousness of the two of them meeting again after the split up, and then you have the fact she's got a daughter now, and Bond is like, oh, is that mine or something? She's like, no, it's not your kid, it's not your kid. She kept telling that. Okay, and of course the kid is his, but she won't tell him, you know, for some reason. They don't even explain why she wouldn't tell him. She just wouldn't say it. But yeah, it's his daughter. Anyway, during the mission, they have to. They found out that where the villain is located. It was on some remote island, as always, which used to be a nuclear missile silo station, and it's being used to deliver chemical weapons to poison people around the planet and to kill them, specially designed for a certain DNA. And the thing about this villain, and I want to say, is that this villain seems to come out of nowhere, okay? Because at the end of the previous film, you got Blofeld was captured and he's put into prison, right? Okay, so that felt like that was the end of the whole fucking James Bond story, because everything was leading up to him confronting Spectre and finally Blofeld, and he beat him. Remember, they were on the bridge and all that stuff, and he had a choice to either shoot Blofeld or not, and he chose not to and let justice have its day, okay? And then he just threw his gun away and walked off. That to me felt like the end. The story was over. The end, okay? But in this movie, it seemed like they deliberately planted a thread into the ending of that film that wasn't there before, okay? And inserted a villain, one more villain that had to be taken out. It's like, well, where did this guy come from? Because, you know, he took out all the other assets that Blofeld had, but, oh, we missed this one. Okay, so it kind of felt a bit contrived that, you know, all of a sudden there's just one more villain that Bond's got to take out, okay, who was, that was left behind or something, okay? This guy goes way back, years back, even before Bond was in the MI6, but he doesn't even look old, for Christ's sake. I mean, the guy looks like he's like maybe 10 years younger than I am, but yet he goes way back, you know? Okay, and so this guy is very boring, this villain. He talks so sentimental and very carefully. You know what I'm saying? He's very boring. He puts you to sleep. He's so hypnotic, you know. I mean, it's like the most boring villain I've ever seen in a James Bond. It's like there's nothing about him that's really that interesting, okay? And he's a totally forgettable character because he's that, you know. So at the end, they, you know, of course, they have their fight and everything. It's just like the last 25 minutes of the movie is when the action starts to pace back up, okay? Because now we're coming to the end here. And so, you know, Bond is on this island, and he's trying to stop these things from being launched, and there's a Navy ship way out at sea that's ready to blow that fucking island all to hell and take all the crap that's there with it. And the station on the island is like from the 1950s, so everything is very old, you know. It's a wonder the damn thing even works, to be honest, the power on it. But everything is basically manually operated, okay? There's no computers per se, and it's all like really old, antiquated stuff. So in order for Bond to allow the Navy to destroy the weapons inside that were going to be launched, he had to open all the silo doors, okay? Because they were in the launch tubes. So in order to do that, he had to go into where the control center is and move these big friggin' levers, like, you know, the kind of levers you'd see when you go skiing and they got a ski lift, you know, and you see the things like that, okay? So it's like very manually operated, okay? And, you know, the buttons are big toggles and shit like that, okay? So the doors start to open and everything, and he finally starts to make his way out, because he's got to get out of there, right? He's like the last person left on the island just to make sure that everything's done right. So on his way out, he stops and finds a little doll on the ground that was dropped by his daughter when the girl he was with there left, because she was captured and brought to that island. But he saved her, and you think that he beat the shit out of the guy he's dead, but he ain't dead, okay? And he finds out when the doors start to close again, he's back in the control room. So he has to run all the way back to the control room and turn the stupid big levers to make the doors open again. And while he's in there, he gets shot, okay? And it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't stop him, but he goes after the guy with everything he's got to beat the hell out of him. Okay, and they have this huge fight, and Bond is brutally beaten, you know, by this guy, and Bond still kills him at the end. But he's like bleeding all over the goddamn place, and he's trying to make an escape, but he can't really get out of there quick enough because he's hurt all over, and so he climbs up. To the top of one of the silo platforms and watches the missiles coming in from the Navy ship that just fired him, because he told them that the place was ready to be bombed. He wasn't going to slow it down. He wanted the place destroyed. So he simply stood there and watched them come down, and then boom, everything, he's gone, you know. And then they have a little memorial for him, and then they fast forward a few months, and we see his daughter again and her mother, and she tells her, "Oh, I'm going to tell you a story about a man named Bond, James Bond," and then that's kind of where it ends, you know. So it was really kind of a, you know, really low keyed. The story wasn't really, in my opinion, I don't think it really qualified as a James Bond story, to be honest, completely honest, because even of all the other James Bond movies that starred Roger Moore and Sean Connery, and those movies, you know, they were pretty, you know, quick paced. Okay, you know, there's always something going on. They didn't get themselves stuck in the mud, basically, with sentimentality or something like that. They didn't really stop for that. But I think what it was that the writers knew they had to make a final story for this version of James Bond by Daniel Craig, so they wanted it to have something of a, you know, a dramatic ending, other than just getting shot and dying in the end, you know what I'm saying? So they had to tailor this story in order for that to happen. Like I said, this movie didn't have to be, because the way the previous film ended, that would have been sufficient to end the Daniel Craig series of James Bond films. This movie seemed like, you know, a last second injection, you know, and, you know, they basically had to conjure up a villain in order to do that, because maybe they didn't know at that time that Daniel Craig was going to come back and do another one, you know, because he co-produced this film, okay? And maybe they did try to end it with the previous film, but then they decided, well, we're going to do another one, probably because they couldn't find somebody right at that time to replace him for another James Bond actor. So instead, they got him to come back for one more time and do another one, and so they had to come up with a story. And I guess then it was at that point when they decided, well, this is it, okay? This is the last Daniel Craig James Bond we're going to do here, okay? So this has got to be the last story. And I think Daniel Craig said, you know, was sort of like, well, what's the gimmick in this movie? What's going to draw people to go watch it? And the answer came back, the death of James Bond, okay? And I think that was the only fucking reason why anybody went to go see that movie, was because they wanted to see James Bond die. Okay, that's what I think what it was. Everything else that happened in that movie was really irrelevant to the gimmick that was coming at the end of the film, and that's what they wanted to see, okay? And I think that they could have done the ending the way they did it, okay? I just don't see why they had to slow it down so much after the first 15 minutes, because it just seemed to go on and on and on, and it just, you know, it's like, where are we going with this, you know? And I felt like, you know, there's just you got Bond running this way, Bond running that way, driving this way, driving that way. It's like, you know, you feel like we're just spinning around in circles here, you know, in the movie. And you know, and then you got this added annoyance of this the 007 replacement kind of injecting herself into it in various points in the movie, and she doesn't really seem to have a really solid point, you know, like maybe they should have had her and him teaming up from the very beginning, okay, and sticking together through the whole story, okay? But no, they're, for a few moments they're together doing something, then they're going their separate ways, and then they come back together, and then they go their separate ways. It's like, well, Jesus, make up your mind. Is this person going to be crucial to the story or not? Or is she just there just to say, look, the studio's willing to replace James Bond with a female character, you know, and here, you know, here's the prototype basically of a female 007. I mean, I think that was the other gimmick too, was just to see who the other 007 was, because they had leaked that out to the media before the release of the film, that there was going to be another 007, and it was, you know, and I think people were kind of like, you know, they were a little bit upset about that. But I think that was the other gimmick. And of course, the bigger gimmick was to see Bond getting killed and die, because that's never happened in any of the James Bond films. Okay, but you know, here's the funny thing: they did a James Bond film, and I can't which one it was, where when it started off, they set him up to get killed. It was a Roger Moore James Bond film, and I can't remember the name of it, but it starts off and he dies, but then it was all a setup to mislead the enemy, because they recovered him from a submarine where, you know, they basically dropped his tube into the ocean and the submarine picked it up. So that way the world would think, okay, he's dead. So now the villains feel like it's like, you know, Gotham City without Batman. Now they can come out and start kicking ass. Well, it was a trap. But in this movie, they actually show you Bond standing right there getting hit with the missile. So there's no way they could come back and say, oh, well, Bond did not die, you know, and he survived it somehow at the last second. You know, no, this is different. So he is dead, so they can't bring him back in another movie. The only way they're going to do another Bond movie is they're going to have to reboot it once again, just like they did for Daniel Craig. They're going to bring in another actor, and they're going to start the whole thing all over again. Okay, so think of it on the terms of MGM doing the multiverse kind of thing with James Bond. So you have James Bond version with Sean Connery, you got James Bond version of Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, you know, all of them. Okay, they all inhabit their own little universe of where they're James Bond. And so that's how they're explaining it. You know, that, you know, Daniel Craig, of course, you know, they knew when they did Casino Royale, they did say that they were rebooting the franchise, okay, because they felt like things were just getting out of hand with Pierce Brosnan's James Bond, and they needed to go back to the beginning, how it used to be. So that was the gimmick with Casino Royale, was we're going to retell that story in a modern time, but we're going to kind of set it back from all the, you know, technology and shit that we were throwing into these James Bonds as we were going ahead, and, you know, so they wanted to dial it back quite a bit and just see James Bond in the beginning. So they did reboot it, and they did 5 films, okay, and he dies, and so now they're going to reboot it again after they find somebody in their 30s to play James Bond. They want to go right back to the beginning again. I say, well, they kind of set it up that way, didn't they? Because they killed off Bond, right? So I mean, that's the only thing they could do. Personally, you know, the way they started James Bond, the films from the very beginning, we didn't really see the beginning of James Bond. We just got thrown into one of his missions, you know, with Sean Connery. What was it, Dr. No? So he was already a veteran spy at that point, okay? Do we really need to have it rebooted like all the way back to day one again, or can we just start another James Bond bunch of films? We'll just start it off, you know, when he's already an agent, okay? He's already 007, and we can just, you know, pick up stories from there. I certainly, you know, I know Spectre was always a big thing with the Sean Connery era of James Bond. Not so much during Roger Moore. Roger Moore, he had like, there was always a different nut, you know, in every movie that was trying to control the world, but it was never Spectre, it was always somebody else. So I say, why? Let's leave Spectre out of it this time, and just have it set up like Roger Moore, where you got the different. Each movie has its own villain, okay, like terrorism or something in different things. Kind of go back to that, because Spectre, I don't know, it didn't seem to really matter so much in the Daniel Craig films, because you knew Spectre was behind it, okay? They didn't really need to show it, we just knew. And so all the villains that he encountered during each of the films was basically the same premise as the way it was with Roger Moore. You just have different villains in each movie, okay? And they weren't connected in any way, they were just individual. They could still do that and it would still work. It doesn't have to be Spectre, it can just be different people. We could say that this is after he defeats Spectre and he's still on the job, and you know what I'm saying. So I don't know if a reboot all the way back to day one is really necessary, because see, they're limiting themselves on what what kind of actor, the age of the actor and stuff like that. They're saying they're looking for somebody in their 30s. That tells me they're already looking at starting a whole thing all over again. And I don't know how you can retell the story in a different way that doesn't seem to resemble what you already saw in the past 5 films, okay? What I think that they ought to do is just find somebody in their 40s, okay, and put them as James Bond after, having dealt with all these other problems, with, having gone past Spectre and all that, okay? And now he's just out there fighting, the wannabes out there that that never got accepted by Spectre, and they're just you know what I'm saying. So that's what they could do, and build their next bunch of movies that way. Now I know they always have that problem with saying, well, we don't want the James Bond character to get that old. Well, Roger Moore wasn't young. I mean, when he was started, he was in his 40s, right? And so he did pretty well. And I think a lot of it is because of the story, how well the stories were written, and he had a certain flamboyance about his character that you saw when he was the Saint in that TV show, The Saint. He carried that over into the James Bond films, which seemed to work quite well for him. He didn't have to be action packed or anything like that. He just had sort of a suave, I've been in this situation before and I know how to deal with it. You know what I'm saying? He's got experience backing him up. He doesn't need to be coming out swinging all the fucking time. So, they could find a person who could be James Bond, but more seasoned and has experience and, can handle himself a lot better. It doesn't have to be, kung fu every 5 minutes and, and doing, and circus acts, like in that first one. I mean, it's just they can tone it down, but I think it would also be better because it would sort of, because we had Daniel Craig and he was 52, I think, in his last movie. So yeah, so you could have an older Bond like in his 40s, and you could do some movies there. I mean, Pierce Brosnan, he wasn't young like that. He was, when he was doing James Bond, the problem with Pierce Brosnan's James Bond was they didn't have very good writers, okay? They didn't execute the stories very well. And Pierce Brosnan as an actor is a brilliant actor. I mean, I've seen him in a lot of different things. And there's no reason in the world why they should have had a problem with him. But because they wanted to change everything and they wanted a fresh actor, he gets a phone call at home saying, "Oh, we don't need you anymore. So, thanks for that job and everything, and goodbye." And that's pretty much how he got it, But he was a good Bond. He was the one they were going to replace Roger Moore with originally, but they couldn't get him because he was too busy doing Scarecrow, Mrs. King back in the 80s. So they had to postpone getting him, and that's why they got Timothy Dalton. But the fans didn't really like Timothy Dalton, and so when Pierce Brosnan was finally free, he came in and started acting as James Bond. So anyway, but this movie here, No Time to Die, it's I guess it's a different kind of Bond film than the other Daniel Craig films that you've seen. If you haven't seen it, Okay, and I know I've given a lot away if you haven't seen it, but if you haven't seen it, it's going to be slow. You know, it's going to be fast and then slow and then fast and then the end. I mean, it's kind of like that. It's not fast paced all the way through like all the other ones were before. So it feels like a very different kind of James Bond film, more sentimental and more sort of like, you know, the family life of James Bond. You know what I'm saying? It's just kind of like that. And the film, like I said, the story itself is just, you know, if they could have put a little bit more action in it or something, it might have been better. But you know, that's kind of what you expect from a James Bond film anyway, right? Is you expect some action and stuff. You don't expect this, what they put in here. You don't expect that. And I could see why there was some mixed feelings about the film after it was released. It's certainly not the way they should have ended it for Daniel Craig. It should have ended on a high note, and I think that previous film before that was really the high note they should have ended it on, not this film. They didn't really have to end James Bond in any way. I mean, like I said, I think that was like a last minute thing, and so they decided, well, we'll do him again because we can't find somebody to replace him yet, so we need to do another film, you know, money, you know. And so they made this, and they had to have a gimmick to get the people back, and that was their gimmick. So anyway, I know I usually talk science fiction, but you know, I always considered James Bond to be kind of science fiction. You know what I'm saying? With all the gadgets and shit he has and stuff, and you know, and plus the, you know, the way you know, the stories are, you know, the villains and everything. It seems so fantastical that you know, that how could you call it anything else but science fiction? You know, but it is what it is, and it's a franchise that's been around over 50 years, and there's still interest out there, but it's a lot of critiquing from people too at the same time. People want what they want out of James Bond, and if it isn't what they want, you're going to know about it, okay? And the franchise always existed on the idea that they will give the fans what they wanted, okay, based on how Ian Fleming had written the character, created the character in his novels and stuff, okay? They tried to stay to that because they know that's where the base is at. And so I think even this was a one-off film, you know, and not going to be any more. So I think it's like, well, if you want to end it here, that's fine, because we're going to expect the next one to be better. Okay, we're going to expect the next Bond to be a home run. So we'll put up with this one for Daniel Craig's you know, sake, because that was his last outing as James Bond. So it's sort of like a goodbye to Daniel Craig more than a goodbye to James Bond, you know. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say about that. So I hope everybody has a great rest of the week. Take care.